Hey everybody, obviously I'm not there tonight. My mom's in town, so I took the day off to hang out with my mom. But I want to tell you about a story that Jesus told. It was a story about a father who had two sons. One son, the younger son, was tired of working for his old man on the family farm, and he wanted to go live on his own. He wanted to go prove that he could live life on his own. So he went to his dad, and he said, "Hey Dad, listen, I want to leave this dirty house. I hate living here, and I want to prove to you that I can go out and make it entirely on my own. So in order to do that, I need money. So what you're going to do is you're going to give me my share of the inheritance, and I'll be on my way." Now, you got to understand that the son was not supposed to get his inheritance until after the father had died. So in demanding it from the father now, he was saying to the father, "You are worth more to me dead than alive." Pretty rude, right? Most fathers would be super outraged at this. They'd be deeply, deeply hurt. But this father instead just gives his younger son the inheritance, and he just sends him on his way. So the son goes to a far-off city, takes all the money, goes out there far away from his old life, far away from his father, and he starts up his new life, and he lives it up. He uses his inheritance to throw huge, fancy parties with fancy, famous people, all the lavish food, all the clothes, the house, the stuff, all the stuff. And he loves it. He's living it up because this is exactly what he wanted. He wanted to go prove that he could have a big, fancy life and didn't have to live on his dad's farm. And for a while, it goes on like this until one day he runs out of money. He loses all the parties. All the fancy, famous people don't want to be around him anymore. He loses all his food, all his clothes, and even his house because he spent all his inheritance. He squandered it away. And in doing so, he hits rock bottom. He finds himself homeless and penniless. He finds himself eating in the literal pig pen, eating their food. And he comes to a realization. He says, "Listen, this is awful. Maybe I should not have left home. I think I might have made a mistake here." So he decides to go back home, but he remembers that when he left his father, he didn't do so on the greatest of terms. Remember the whole "I wish you were dead" kind of thing and taking the money? So he comes up with a plan. And he says, "Listen, I'm going to go back and I'm going to beg for a job as one of my dad's servants, because even living in the servant quarters of my own house is better than living with the pigs here. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go home and I'm just going to beg for my life back." So he travels for days to get back home. And the whole time as he's going, he's kind of just going over what he's going to say to his dad. He's rehearsing his speech, trying to figure out the right words to say to convince him to let him come back to his family, even just as a servant, just going over and over and over it. And finally, he comes over a hill, and he sees off in his distance his family farm. He's still a ways off, but he can kind of see a little bit of commotion happening up there. He can see that there's some people running around, and he can hear some shouting, but he can't quite make out the words. He just sees a bunch of people just something's going on. And after a minute, as he keeps walking, he sees the front door of the main house burst open. And out of the house steps his father, looking right in his direction. Now, even though he's a far ways off, he knows when his dad is looking at him. When your parents are looking at you and you feel like you've done something wrong, there's just a parent stare and kids know it's a thing. And this guy, the younger son, thinks, "Well, I bet my dad's angry at me. I'd be angry. I'm angry at myself, so of course he's angry at me." So the younger son takes a big gulp, big breath, and prepares to have a humiliating conversation with his dad once he walks the last quarter mile to his house. He takes a step and he puts his head down while he walks. His head's down so he doesn't see that the servants and the farmhands have all gathered to see what's going to happen. He doesn't see that there's an audience. His head is down as he walks so he doesn't see that his father is not still standing in the doorway. He's looking straight at the ground, so he totally misses the fact that his father, a dignified and well-respected man in the community, has hiked up his tunic and he's at a full sprint directly at him. Eventually, the son looks up and he sees this scene, sees his father sprinting towards him. And he's got the biggest smile on his face. And as the dad gets closer, because the father isn't angry, the father's not going to send him away. See, the younger son was too busy worrying about his own shame to see that the father was desperate to have him back. And as the father begins to get closer to the son begins his rehearsed speech. "Dad, I'm so sorry. And before he can even get a full sentence out, he's cut off because his father gets to him and just bear hugs him. He's crying because his son is home. He looks at his son just so happy. The tears are streaming down both of their faces. And the father finally turns to his workers, to all the people there that are gathered, and says, we're going to throw a party. We're going to celebrate with all the finest foods because my son, who was lost, is now found. Now, Jesus could have ended the story there, happily ever after. But then you wouldn't get to hear the part about the older son. Because remember, this is a story about a man who had 2 sons. The older son sees all this, sees this lavish party being thrown for this runaway, this traitor. And the younger son is furious. After all, he never left home. He stayed and worked all these years faithfully. He never asked for anything. He did his job. He never dishonored his father. He worked hard because that's what you're supposed to do. You're the older brother. You're supposed to work hard and hold things down even when everybody else runs away. So the older son goes up to his father, angry as he's ever been, and he says, Dad, I don't get it. All these years I've been slaving away for you. I never did anything wrong. I stayed home. I took care of things. And this son of yours leaves and then comes back and somehow he gets the party? The one who left you? The one who wished you were dead? He gets the party after being gone all these years? I don't think so. And he tells his father, I'm not going in that house while he's here. I am not going to this party. I will not participate in this. And the whole time the father is listening to the oldest son. Listening intently, but with that small, knowing smile on his face. Puts his arm around his oldest son and he says, My son, you are always with me. And everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad. Because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost, and now he's found. Maybe you've heard this story before. This is one of Jesus' most famous parables, his most famous stories. It's the parable of the lost sons. You can find it in Luke chapter 15. And maybe it might be my most favorite Jesus story. It's this beautiful story of redemption, beautiful story of forgiveness, a son who wasted everything away and didn't deserve the father's love, but still got it. And we often focus on just that part of the story. We often identify as the child who walks away thinking they know everything, only to find out that in the end, we don't know everything, and we find ourselves dirty, homeless, and worthless, needing to crawl back to God, who in turn offers us grace and forgiveness. That's often how this story is taught, completely leaving out the older brother. And I think that's a mistake, because the story is not about just the younger brother. The story is about 2 sons. And the younger brother provides the backdrop for what I think is the real point of the story. Because the real point of the story is what happens with the older brother. The one who gets mad because he never got the treatment that the younger brother, the wayward one, is getting. Maybe you've been in a situation like that where you do all the work but somebody else gets all the credit. It's frustrating, right? It would make me mad. It does make me mad when that happens. But what the father says to the oldest son at the end is what really, really blows me away. And it's what I want you to pay attention to here. You are always with me, and everything I have is yours. So the older son is complaining that he never gets a party. And the father comes back at him and says, My son, you've always been at the party. You've just been too obsessed with trying to make me love you because of your hard work, that you never stopped to see that I always loved you, no matter what. You are always with me, and everything I have is yours. You know, of all words that Jesus could have put in the God character in the story, he chose those, and I think that's fascinating. I think that's really important. Because y'all, listen, the point of this whole week, the point of what I'm saying here is this. If you catch nothing else that I'm saying, catch this. People will often try to convince you that you are sinful, ugly people who need to be saved from a vengeful God. And that's what Jesus' purpose is, to be the savior from a God who's going to kill you because of your bad deeds. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. We don't need to be redeemed because we already are. Once we step out of the idea that we are inherently bad and into the idea that we were created on purpose and for a purpose, we can then be liberated to live into that purpose. So this week, I want you to tap into that purpose. Tap into that purpose God has for you and realize you are already loved no matter what.